So I finished the script about 9 months ago as of the time I'm recording this, and in that entire 9 months I completely forgot to write an intro. So I'm just doing this completely unscripted right now. So I'm partway through my journey to remaster every single Death Battle season ranking that I've been doing, and I mean, this feels pretty self-explanatory from the title and the fact that anyone watching this has probably seen the other ones I've done. And if you haven't, then why are you starting with Season 4, the least remarkable season that Death Battle has ever made? Which, yeah, that's kind of spoiling my thoughts on the season beforehand, but, yeah, there really isn't anything else left for me to say, so why don't we just get started with last place?
Ugh, 2 out of 10.
Venom vs. Bane may just be the single worst cape shit fight that Death Battle has ever done. The only competition I can see there is Rogue vs. Wonder Woman. Like, even taking the analysis aside, it makes Batgirl vs. Spider-Gwen look good in comparison. It ultimately comes down to whether I'd rather have an okay fight with a fucking agonizing analysis, or a fairly solid analysis with a fight that's slow, boring, poorly animated, and goes on forever. Okay, let's get into the episode then. The analysis is honestly not that bad at all. I liked a few jokes well enough, and I found the character's backstory interesting. Nothing amazing, but it was fine, I guess. Then we get into the fight, which just... what even is there to say that isn't blatantly obvious? This has the worst lighting in the series, and the editing and characterization are definitely contenders for worse in their fields as well. The lighting speaks for itself. Sometimes I struggle to see Bane, never mind the character whose body is practically designed to blend into darkness. Bane was merely born into the shadows. Venom straight up is the shadows. Not like it's much better when we can see the things happening on screen though, because we have some okay choreography bogged down by some slow as hell animation, which is at points difficult to tell what's even going on. There's an overuse of stills, there's some really bad sound editing, and it'll sometimes jump from one shot to the next without showing the shot connecting them. Sometimes there'll be stupid shit like Bane roiding up after blowing Venom up so he has no reason to assume he's even alive. We don't either because they removed the shot from the Rooster Teeth version that showed him sneaking away from the fire. Venom turns Bane's backbreaker around on him by stabbing him through the leg, but it's not conveyed super well, and then we hard cut to Bane having already been stabbed half a dozen times. There are a lot of jarring and awful cuts to this green water which is supposed to be Bane using his Venom. Why is this edited like a fucking Pepsi Man commercial? Also, why is Venom acting like Carnage? He had that issue against Corona as well, but at least there he had some unironically entertaining lines. Here, everything he says causes me agony. Sometimes it'll be ironically funny, like the spicy bloodline, but I also still hate it. He is literally just Carnage, but without the entertainment value. And then the fucking death is... okay, actually surprisingly good. Carnage line aside, Venom filling Bane's head up with the symbiote, causing it to distort until it finally bursts, is really cool. Not only is it a creative use of Venom's unique toolkit, but it's fucking horrifying. I also like the epilogue shot where Batman comes across Venom devouring Bane's brain. I've given myself so many tongue twisters in this script, why? I think it could have been better if it was a little slower and we got more time to take in what was happening as it happened, but as it is, it's a great ending to an otherwise shit fight. Oh yeah, and I mentioned the Rooster Teeth version earlier. That's because there are actually 2 versions of this fight. The YouTube version, which was the fixed version, the one I've been focusing on, and the original version on the Rooster Teeth website with the original uncut animation, which is much longer, much more bloated, and much more agonizing. I've seen it once, and I don't plan to watch or talk about it ever again. There's more than enough to go over here to give this episode its own review, but I don't think I will. I don't like doing entire videos focused on negative criticism, and while I'll still cover any new episodes that happen to be awful or discuss bad episodes related to newer ones, I'm not going to go back and make a point to spend 15 minutes bullying an episode that came out years ago. Thankfully, nothing's came out in the last 5 years that I hate to anywhere near the same extent as this episode, and I really hope it stays that way.
I made it so that furries are legal and can vote. No!
Lucario vs. Renamon has Pokemon vs. Digimon in the title, which I do not think is fair to the vastly superior episode with that title to be lumped in with this episode. The analysis starts pretty fun, taking a jab at Lucario getting special treatment because it got a movie. Then it kinda becomes boring until later on in Renamon's analysis. I like Wiz bluntly telling Boomstick that Renamon's better than him, and then making fun of Digimon attack names is fairly amusing. But then the worst part of the episode is when they put the words "like a boss" on screen, and I can't forgive that. Okay, I can't ignore the elephant in the room. They flat out show sexualized Renamon fanart on screen uncensored. It's not funny, it's not charming in any way, you're using fanart after season 2. Why the fuck did this joke get greenlit? We won't show any blood in a My Little Pony episode because it might traumatize a younger audience, but we can show fetish art of Renamon because Pokemon and Digimon don't have very young fan bases at all. Fucking hell, this is one of the least funny jokes in the series. Perhaps I treated Thanos vs Darkseid too harshly. Anyway, so the fight is boring. Well animated, yeah, but nothing particularly memorable happens until the ending. A lot of it's Lucario blitzing around Renamon, even though they say that Lucario can only reach Renamon's regular speeds in short bursts, so well done on that. It shows both of their agility well at least. I like how they use the pillars to move around. I don't like Lucario's Aura Storm. We could have got more actual Pokemon moves, but no, we get his useless Final Smash, which is shown to be even more useless in this fight. What even is there to say here, because there's nothing to comment on? It's less than 2 minutes of noise and then Renamon dies. Credit where it's due though, I do love the finisher. Lucario powering through the Diamond Storm is great, and then he uses a Bone Rush to stab Renamon through the throat and slowly chokes her to death as she holds on for dear life. That is gruesome as hell and I love it. Too bad it's attached to an otherwise bland slug of an episode with one of the worst attempts at a joke the show has ever done.
Here we are in the future and it's wrong.
After how draining the rest of the season's mediocrity has been, Batman Beyond vs Spider-Man 2099 doesn't leave me wanting to talk about it much, given that it's one of the last ones I had to watch, and I've already had to write for about half a dozen other mediocre episodes and also Venom vs Bane. Actually, even then, I don't think this reaches the bar of mediocre. I remember this being part of the bad but not awful trilogy that this season gave us, alongside Lucario vs Renamon and Sub-Zero vs Glacius, and that more or less still holds up. Though I'll discuss the ice fight in a minute because I don't really think it's bad anymore. The start of the fight is fine enough, choreography is fairly solid, but the animation's kinda slow and I never found myself particularly interested. I like the fight on the side of the building, which has Miguel's web slinging against Terry's rocket boots. There are like 2 other good shots with Terry's reflection in the window and the callback to the first Batman vs Spider-Man episode. The voice acting's decent, I actually quite liked Miguel's cheesy dialogue at points, and there's a point where Miguel's in a standing pose while rising from a web sling, and I thought that was a neat bit of character animation because it shows how comfortable he is with his web slinging. And that's really about it. Is it weird that I sound so uninterested despite bringing up how the fight is mostly solid? Well, that's because I've already brought up everything in the fight that I even remotely find interesting. There are hardly any uses of their varied arsenals like Terry's blades and electrocution, or Miguel's entire other suit that they didn't even include. Rocket-powered flight to match Terry's, different vision modes to counter Terry's invisibility, having Terry use invisibility at all to show how Miguel's lack of spider sense is one of his biggest detriments when comparing this to the original Batman vs Spider-Man. No, those are all too interesting for that. They gave those to Batman's next episode, hopefully. Oh wait. If the fight picked up after they landed on the ground, then maybe I'd like it more, but the fight ends after less than 2 minutes because Terry uses a flashbang of his own accord, which Bruce is given credit for. He shocks Lila out with the electric shock that he didn't use, and the death is over before it even has a chance to sink in. Okay. I like when Bruce got to give Terry information, but I wish he could have been more instrumental to the death. I wish Lila could have been more of anything really. She does fuck all.
Can my fangs pierce his suit?
I think so.
Wow, thanks for giving us info on a scene that maybe could have been cool to see, but no, Miguel dies, instantly stomped. Thanks, Lila, I'm so glad you're here. The analysis doesn't fare much better. Any jokes that I like are completely cancelled out by Boomstick getting horny from Marilyn Monroe. That is not a sentence I ever thought I would say, but okay. There's a Boomstick's dad joke too, oh joy. And much like Batman vs Black Panther, it does nothing but bring up shit that could have been cool to see, but we get the bare minimum standard for a cape shit fight. Though to this episode's credit, it is somehow less boring, uses more gadgets, and has a better use of strategy than Batman vs Black Panther. Yet is somehow still outdone by Batman vs Captain America, good lord. Much like a lot of Death Battle Season's penultimate episodes, this is bland as fuck and I have no desire to rewatch it. Go away.
It's cold.
Sub-Zero vs Glacius is one of the biggest disappointments in the show for me. Not that I outright dislike it, at least not anymore, but this was one of my most wanted episodes at the time and I popped off for its announcement, so I'm understandably a bit let down that it turned out so mediocre. The animation... what even is there to talk about? The choreography is fine enough on Sub-Zero's end, but for Glacius he spends an odd amount of time focusing on melee combat, and the one time he does go for his usual projectiles, it's so fucking slow and low energy. Doesn't help that these sprites don't match very well. Fulgor and Sector hardly fit each other one-to-one, but the difference is especially noticeable here. Fulgor sprites are much easier for me to see exactly where he's facing and which of his limbs are doing what, but with Glacius there are points where I kinda lose him in the background, and the ending has him turn his head and look shocked, which I had to actively try to see. Thankfully, that's the only advantage Fulgur vs. Sector has over this episode. Glacius' sprites might be worse, but the action at least isn't actively confusing, and both Subby and Glacius actually do stuff for the whole fight. On the topic of positives, there are some things I quite like. I like that Sub-Zero gets voice clips that work naturally into the battle, the quiet combo breaker near the start was a nice touch, and the death is pretty good. It's a flawed death with an obvious fake-out ending and a weird-looking motion tween on Glacius' spine, but how can I not like an ending that works in the most iconic fighting game kill ever? Rewatching this episode, I'm surprised I didn't outright dislike it. The animation was pretty boring and I might have given it a 4 out of 10, but I surprisingly enjoyed the analysis well enough to where I'd give it a 5. It's nothing special, but it was decent enough. I really like how Glacius' rundown ends in particular. I get why people would hate this episode, but I also see a lot of really weird criticism thrown its way. For some reason, people don't like that this fight is restricted to a 2D plane, and I get that that makes the fight much less dynamic, but it does stay faithful to old school fighting games. And it also works in a few uses of the Z-axis since the old Killer Instinct games had that. Those are the conclusion which people hate as well because minigame feats, but I don't care about that at all. About the only thing that bothers me is they say Sub-Zero can chop straight through ice without even going into the possibility of Glacius' ice being unnaturally strong. You could turn the exact same argument around and say that Glacius' sword limbs are strong enough to tear apart skin and flesh as a reason for him to win. Whatever, the episode's fine, didn't like it, didn't dislike it.
That I brought up as something that should have been done with Nathaniel Bloodclot versus Laurel Cucumber.
Of all the season premieres death battles done, by all accounts, Laura vs. Nathan is one of them. I still stand by this being my second least favourite premiere. Still better than Batman vs. Black Panther because at least there's some stuff going on here and there, with a lot more that I could say that I like. Plus an Uncharted vs. Tomb Raider episode's going to do a way better job at sticking with me than Batman coming back for a third time against a Marvel opponent. So analysis wise, it's fine. I liked learning about these characters, but I was never particularly entertained. As much as I dislike Horny Boomstick, they kept it to a minimum, and him planning for Laura to be his future ex-wife is actually kind of funny to me. I like that he's planning the divorce before the marriage is even underway. My favourite part though was when Wiz said quick wit. It's always a joy whenever I find a line in an episode that matches a shitty inside joke that me and my friends have. And the fight is ineptly lame. Sometimes there would be something that would make me go, oh wow, that was actually kinda decent, and sometimes there would be some bullshit that made no sense, averaging out to an episode that's perfectly, well, average. Okay, so positives. The voice acting's okay. I like the escape from the collapsing temple. Nathan making the jump that Laura couldn't is a neat way to show his advantage there without him having a line that explicitly calls attention to it. The hand-to-hand combat is Sumatorian's weakest, but it's still fine. And unlike most, I actually like the death. To my knowledge, the Uncharted games have a luck meter instead of a health bar, so whenever Nathan gets shot or whatever, he doesn't truck through lethal wounds. He gets lucky enough to where they don't hit anything important, and once that bar runs out, so does his luck, and he dies. The death here has Laura doing the helicopter axe-throw thing from the analysis which blows it up, using all of Nathan's remaining luck to survive. And then the helicopter blade just so happens to impale him right through the stomach. It's not amazing or anything, but I like it. Maybe if I cared about Nathan at all, I'd be part of the camp that's upset about how it's apparently insulting to his character. But I've never played an Uncharted game in my life, so I can't say I'm too bothered. From an outsider's point of view, it doesn't seem very disrespectful at all. Right, negatives now. While Nathan's decently charismatic in the fight, Laura got on my fucking nerves. They portray her in the analysis as this clever treasure hunter, but the animation portrays her as a fucking idiot who has Nathan at gunpoint twice, or I guess bowpoint the second time, and does not act on it. She has amazing survival skills. So amazing that she'll just stand and let someone slowly reach behind them and pull an assault rifle on her while she has 2 pistols aiming at them. So quick-witted that she'll point a loaded bow in her opponent's face and stop to make... I don't even know what this line is actually. Have to do what you have to do? What exactly is it that you have to do? At no point in the animation does Nathan try to fight Laura unless he is directly defending himself from her. So she is at no risk whatsoever against an opponent who she has removed all ranged options from. And if he's such a grave threat that you have to take him out right there and then, why stop to drop a quirky nothing line and then bail while you still have plenty of time before the car crashes? At least have Drake's hand land on the steering wheel when he gets knocked over and then spin it around to have the car throw Laura off, or something that doesn't continue this episode's insistence of Laura being a complete moron. And while I defended the death, I won't defend what leads up to it. I'm sure plenty of people thought that Nathan was going to fly away and everyone was going to live happily ever after. On top of that, we have the models, which haven't aged amazingly. Usually it's not too bad, but then we have Laura's mouth in some shots. I know she's British, but come on. Laura also shoots the Grail and blames Nathan for it for some reason, and then summons a motorbike by sheer magic somehow. I know a bunch bunch of these problems are because of rendering issues, and priorities had to be made in regards to which scenes got cut. Ben said as much in his Road to 100 blogs, and some of those missing shots could have fixed a few of these issues. Torian's episodes this season could go one of two ways. We could either get a fucking masterpiece, or a mess that is as subpar as it is because of how it was a victim of circumstance. Oh, and Virgil vs. Sephiroth happened too. As much as I ragged on the bad parts of the animation, I think it's an overall okay episode. It got a little worse for me on a rewatch, to the point where I can't even say it barely scrapes into the fine I guess I like it tier, like it was when I did my ranking of the premieres. Metal Sonic vs. Zero is an episode everyone lost their shit over when it first came out. It was one of the most universally beloved episodes I'd seen in a while. Of course, you'd still have the people that show up to argue against the verdict and not acknowledge the rest of the episode, but that's an inevitability for every single episode, especially one where a Sonic character lost. The people who focus on the animation loved it, myself included, but now in retrospect, people seem to look back on this episode as kinda mediocre, myself included. Of all the episodes this season, this is undoubtedly the one where my opinion of it has dropped the most over time. Not bad, but I can't say I enjoyed it. Which sucks because this fight's choreography is actually pretty good. They don't use all their vast arsenals of weapons, but they use what they do effectively. My favourite trading of powers is at the end, where Metal uses his chaos control to slow time, but Zero uses his speed advantage to still pull off his own time stop and use the opening to kill Metal. On the topic of speed, that's this fight's greatest strength. The way he uses squash and stretch to create this feeling of blistering speed is amazing. This is one of the fastest feeling fights they've done since Goku vs. Superman. So this was a well choreographed fight with a good death and a great conveyance of speed. Why is it not higher? Oh good lord. You've likely heard before that this fight has some of, if not the absolute worst sound design in the series, and yeah, that checks out. That's not a specific example taken out of context, by the way, that's how the entire fight is. I can't show every example because I would get copyright strike to hell, but go rewatch the fight and you'll see what I mean. I think the only sound effect that isn't pathetically weak, clearly meant for a different kind of impact, both, or just straight up missing, is Metal rushing past these cars, and that takes place within the first few seconds of the animation before Zero even shows up. Every single attack, and I mean every single one, either feels weaker than it should or like the attack outright wasn't landed. This would legitimately be worse than Smokey vs. McGruff in that regard, even if that one was played completely straight. It is awful. There's also the visuals. I appreciate that we're going for a more unique visual style, but when they cut to those pixely 3D models, it doesn't look good. It's all super stiff with some facial expressions that got rightfully memed to death even back in 2017. Not great. A good analysis could have saved this episode from a 5 out of 10, but we got one decently funny running gag about Metal being a metalhead, and some good background music with the rest being white noise. I wish I could love this episode like I used to. In fact, when it first came out, it was one of my favourites of all time. But behind Tracer vs. Scout, this may just be the episode where my opinion on it has changed over time in the most negative way. What a shame.
Screw you, Moon! You can't control me!
Thor vs. Wonder Woman is certainly an episode. After this season had just started getting its shit together in the latter half, it's a shame that it had to descend back into mediocrity. The analysis is whatever, the clips at the start of both of them made me groan in pain. I like Boomstick going on about snakes, especially since it ends with Wiz paraphrasing the funny line. The rest is in one ear and out the other. The fight could have been cool, there's certainly a lot going for it. It's a Torian fight, so as per usual, it's well choreographed, fluidly animated, sound design's good, the whole shebang. It even has some great shots like the destruction of Wonder Woman's shield at the start, the mountains they tear apart later on, all building up to the destruction of the moon. But outside of those scenes, I found the fight kinda boring, not gonna lie, Wiz. It was well animated, but what was actually happening wasn't exactly keeping my interest. Not the aggressively bad I can feel my soul leaving my body kinda boring, just average I'm not super into this kinda boring. There aren't a whole lot of outright bad scenes in this, but it still does have its issues. There's the weak setup for one, but that's nothing compared to the development hell this episode went through in regards to its rendering process. Plenty of shots have animation errors with the models clipping, aren't fully rendered, have unfinished effects, or were obviously cut entirely. And I hate judging an episode off of being unfinished, that doesn't feel fair to the animators, but that doesn't change the fact that they released an unfinished episode and it gets really distracting at points. It's not like it's free from bad scenes outside of that though, the ending and the deaths suck. Thor gets a weak as hell transformation into Warrior's Madness, hits Diana a few times with some admittedly good sound design, but when he misses he for some reason causes no collateral damage. Diana hits him once with his own hammer, and this wounds Thor so badly that he exits Warrior Madness. Then only after he is basically already defeated does Diana take her gauntlets off and finish him at full power. That's not even getting into Thor's death face, the model T-posing, or the bizarrely awful editing. Maybe if this episode got fully finished, I would have liked it more. It's got a lot of good stuff in it, including the voice actors who I forgot to mention before. Every line except for "Never shall the God of Thunder relent" is delivered well. But regardless, as it is, this episode is fine. It is generic cape shit that I have no strong opinion on one way or the other, and I have actively struggled to find enough interest in it to write about it. If I want a good Thor episode, I have two other options. If I want a good Wonder Woman episode, well then that's too bad, because this is about as good as she got on this show. And the more you think about that, considering she's one of the few characters to get 3 episodes, that's very sad.
Vegeta at his peak could destroy a universe roughly 260,000 times over. The equivalent of 8 pickup trucks.
Man, how many aggressively average episodes are there gonna be this season? Much like the previous 4, Captain Marvel vs. Android 18 isn't necessarily bad, but I have no reason to ever go back to it. The fight is such a mixed bag. It starts out pretty good, the combat's well animated and captures the speed of Dragon Ball fairly well at points. And it's got a few funny scenes like 18 pulling Carol's hair and the bit where they smack each other into the ground at the same time. Plus the animation visually is quite nice, the sprite work is great and the colours are nice and vibrant. Then Binary comes in and everything goes down the shitter. Look at these sprites. Her proportions change, the limitations show in how awkwardly she's animated at some points. But I hardly even notice those first 2 things because look at her fucking head, oh my god. Then 18's hurt by normal rocks, she feels the need to destroy a big one. She breaks Carol's arms in an awkward looking way, but I do admittedly like the kill where she stomps Carol in the head after her sheer stubbornness refuses to give up. Not much else I can say I like in the latter half of the fight except for the one line made retroactively funnier by Cable vs. Booster's existence. I could have maybe given this a 6 out of 10 because it's honestly just fine if the analysis didn't suck. There were a handful of okay jokes, but none that got any kind of reaction out of me, and the versus part comes across as very sloppily done. I don't care about accuracy as long as you remain internally consistent, but when you have to publicly correct yourself twice within like a week or 2 of the episode coming out, yeah, probably not a good sign. Doesn't help that they offhandedly mention 18 being a planet buster, Carol having the power level of a white hole, then expect us to be impressed by holy shit, that's like hitting someone with 8 pickup trucks. Man, this was a lame episode. The animation at least started well, it had a few good scenes, and it had some great voice acting. Getting the Team 4-star actress for 18 was definitely a big plus, but it kinda got worse as it went along and the lackluster analysis didn't do it any favours. Thankfully though, we're halfway through, and much like with Season 3, we have a massive jump in quality between this and the next episode.
And my trailer's caught on fire.
Fire?
Wait, Natsu vs. Ace is actually really good? What the fuck? I always remember this episode being really mediocre, to the point where the segment on it in my text-to-speech ranking was like 5 seconds long, where I basically just said that I didn't care and that the death was good. And I mean, I guess I wasn't wrong to an extent. I still don't care the least bit about these characters. I've never seen an episode of Fairy Tail, and my One Piece knowledge ends after Volume 3, so it is a little harder for me to get invested. That said, the episode overcame that hurdle and kept my attention both in the animation and in the analysis. For the latter, it started very strongly with a funnier version of the joke from Fett vs. Samus Remastered, and then the rest of Natsu's analysis was good. Ace's started out equally good, got a bit unfunny towards the end, but I love how they chose to end it on how his greatest feat was choosing to take a hit and dying. The fight is equal levels of fairly solid for the most part with some flaws in the middle, but a stellar ending to close things off. I think the fight's greatest strength up till the ending is how it incorporates fire into the background. I already thought the 3D background held up fairly well and the sprites didn't clash horribly with it, but the way the buildings and ground around them catch on fire serves 3 key purposes. It shows Natsu's tendency to cause collateral damage, it gives us a visual to show the progression of the fight, and it creates some great looking lighting effects. The shot of the silhouettes only given colour when they create more fire is so good. And then of course there's the death where Natsu uses strategy to manipulate Ace into a spot where he can land the one hit he needs, and gives us one of the best disintegration deaths of the show. The hand-drawn stuff made for the episode was good beforehand, but this takes it to the next level. This must have been hell to make look so smooth. But Luis did it anyway, and he's a legend for it. I have to clarify hand-drawn stuff made for the episode by the way, because this is yet another case of some shots having crusty renders and shots taken directly from both anime, and it is just as visually unappealing as you'd expect. Still, about my only other complaint with the fight is Natsu not trying to eat Ace as soon as he realised he was made of fire, since that seemed like a kind of obvious solution and they made a point of him being a great strategist in the analysis. I like how Ace has a line later on that calls back to that though. On the topic of the battle's humour though, I like how Ace also eats the bone at the start even though he'd already eaten all the meat off of it. That's amazing. I didn't love the episode or anything, but I enjoyed it well enough, which is way more than I expected. But yeah, take a shot every time they say fire and you'll be fucking dead.
Moon's full, RJ. See you in the morning.
Smokey Bear vs. McGruff the Crime Dog is the first hand-drawn fight the show did for some reason. I mean, I guess it makes sense they pick a goofy matchup like this to experiment on, and them not having as much to use means the shorter length of the fight makes sense. And even though this isn't some super action-packed thrill ride, I had a lot of fun with it. The analysis only has 3 things that bother me. They misused the word omnipotence in the sidebar, which confused me, the Snoop Dogg joke was painful, and I could have done without that one clip of the dog licking his balls on screen. But only one of those is something that particularly annoys me, because one of them is just a piece of text and the other's a background clip that's on screen for maybe 2 seconds. The rest of the rundowns are fun as hell. I've heard some people say the bear pump battle was cringy, but that's also kind of the point. It's awful, but it's also intentional and done in a funny way. Plus, I enjoyed learning about these characters and a lot of the wackier shit they've been a part of. The jokes are generally landing, I got to learn about bears and bloodhounds as a species, which was neat, and it was cool seeing how the limited footage forced creativity with what they showed on screen. The fight's also very fun, but does have some issues. For one, it's super short, barely clocking in at 2 minutes. I get that there's not much you can do with these power sets, but I'm sure you still could have done more with utilizing the environment and stuff. Hell, we never even see Smokey stop time, that's just McGruff that does that. My second issue is much more major though, the sound design. It's not Metal Sonic vs. Zero levels of awful, and it is fairly unique, but a lot of the hits feel like they completely lack impact. McGruff's series of punches at the start are fine, but they feel like they have a similar level of impact to him tackling Smokey, or Smokey launching McGruff into the horizon. If they'd started really cartoony and then upped it to proper meaty sound design once Smokey started going for blood, then I'd be fine with that, since it would at least give some kind of feeling of escalation. As it is now, it is the big thing holding back an otherwise enjoyable fight scene. What stands out most about this episode is the art style. This is their first hand-drawn episode, and I love the way everything looks. The characters are drawn super well, the environments look great, the colours are all nice and vibrant, it's very pleasing on the eyes. Of course, good visuals alone aren't enough to carry a fight if what happens in it isn't good, and thankfully the content of the fight's also up to par. The setup works so well with McGruff opting to comment on a forest fire happening instead of stopping it, which pisses Smokey off enough to try and kill him. The combat is smooth and free from any noticeable jank. It's not reaching Goku vs Superman levels of speed and intensity or anything, but that helps sell the more grounded power level these two have. They don't have any crazy powers that can be worked into the fight without ending it there and then, but we still get some good standout bits. Probably my favourite of which is McGruff aggressively saying "I'll show you respect" as he brings out the force field. It's a great line sold even better by a great delivery. Oh, and on that topic, they got Chris Sabat and Chris Rager to voice Smokey and McGruff respectively. The big name VA starring in the gag episode for the sake of the bit is really funny to me, but regardless their performances are really good. The rest of the fight continues being fun, if nothing overly amazing. Smokey shatters the force field, knocks down a tree, there's a funny bit where McGruff shrugs while stopping time before getting smacked across the forest. He hits Smokey with his truck, Smokey counters by growing giant since this is the one time his current strength isn't cutting it, and then we get the death, which I fucking love. Smokey has McGruff dead to rights, and McGruff accepts his defeat. Usually I don't like when characters sit and do nothing when they're about to die, but this is one of the few cases where it's justified. McGruff knows he's not able to do anything to save himself because his car is still in Smokey's hand. He's gonna get crushed anyway, and if he stops time and jumps off, he'll just get stepped on, assuming he doesn't die to the fall, of course. So he gets one last line where he asks the audience to remember him. Smokey crushes him between his hands, we get the only bit of blood in the fight, and McGruff even lets out a whimper in his final moment. It's actually kinda sad, but in a good way. This is an episode that isn't particularly stand out in any way other than its art style, but I don't care, I had so much fun with it. And the short length of it all makes it a really easy rewatch.
What's an anime?
On a rewatch, I can't say Naruto vs Ichigo clicked with me as much as it did before. I still liked it, it's a very, very good episode, but I can't call it one of my favourites of all time, sadly. Pretty much all of my issues come from the fight, because the analysis is great. It's very lengthy and detailed. I wasn't dying laughing at any of the jokes outside of that one bit I'm sure was improv, but this served as an interesting learning experience that covered all the bases it needed to. This was also the episode to introduce the corner boxes, the usefulness of which varies from episode to episode. In this episode they were handled very well, with all the important stuff being covered vocally, with extra tidbits being given in the corners as to not disrupt the flow of the episode and make it go on for an entire hour. If this was an episode like that one Easy Target people still won't stop crying about, the conclusion would have been, well, Ichigo was pretty powerful, but he had no counters for attacks based on spiritual energy. The winner is Naruto. And the corner boxes would say, well, even if we gave Ichigo all the benefit of the doubt, he's still only 1.4 times faster, and ever so slightly weaker than even base form Naruto. Also, Naruto has seen souls before. The fight, on the other hand, I mean, it's good, and I can see why so many people consider it a masterpiece, but it has a lot of things that at least bother me enough to say that I don't love it. The fight is fast paced, but to the point point where it hardly gives most of the big moments enough time to really sink in. They blast through their transformations without them feeling like big changes in the progression of the fight. They just kind of happen, and it isn't helped by the shaky and disorienting camera, which combined with the quick cuts makes it difficult for me to tell what's even happening at some points. There's this whole bit of Ichigo fighting off a swarm of shadow clones where, gun to my head, I could not tell you what's happening. Again, there's the saturation of the animation's color palette. I'm not super into it, but it doesn't actively bother me as much as it does with some people. So my issues with the fight extend over most of the runtime and kinda distract from the good scenes, which sucks because this fight has a lot of good in it. The hand-run stuff is nice, the voice acting's fantastic, the track fits the high-paced energy of what's happening on screen, and there are a good few scenes that I really like. Naruto actively strategizing and communicating with Kurama to avoid Ichigo when he can't see him, only to set him up for the smoke bomb and Rasengan dogpile, is great, even if Naruto getting stabbed doesn't look quite right. I also find the Ducko Jutsu kinda funny, especially since it is Naruto's only transformation that's given enough time to sink in. But those two scenes don't compare to my two favourite parts of the animation. Naruto's transformation into the Ninetales Kurama whatever mode isn't super impactful on its own, but it is more than made up for with the line and attack that follow it. Naruto hits Ichigo with one of the few attacks in the fight that is given enough breathing room, while making his Believe It line sound unironically cool. And even that doesn't compare to the death, which is such ghoulish overkill that it would make Thor vs Raiden blush. Ichigo hits Naruto with a Mugetsu, completely draining him of all his powers. This is do or die. If this attack does not kill Naruto, he has lost. And it is given just the right amount of time with a moment of complete silence. Everything stops to sell the impact. But Naruto isn't done. He comes back in full swing, at his maximum power with a Kurama avatar using the tailed beast bomb. Ichigo is depowered and injured, probably couldn't even beat a regular person in his current state, and now he's got to fight a fox the size of a mountain with enough firepower to blast the moon apart. But he doesn't back down. He picks up a stick and sees things out to the bitter end as Naruto eviscerates him with everything he has. Fucking phenomenal. Then Naruto isn't bothered at all and acts like he didn't even have to try or anything, but we can't win them all. This is still an S tier death. I mean, it gives us a Chuck Norris vs Sekida Sanshiro cameo in the epilogue shot. How could I not love it? Once again, I can see why this is a favourite for so many people, and I like it a lot, but the persistent issues with the pacing and camera work in the fight take away a lot of my enjoyment for it. That said, this still should have been the season finale. I don't care that I like Sephiroth vs Virgil more. This is a way bigger legacy match. The amount of detail put into the analysis surpasses any episode that isn't Goku vs Superman. It would have fit perfectly as the finale. Hell, maybe if it had a bit more time in the oven, it could have used more moments in the fight to let things sink in instead of frantically rushing from one scene to the next.
I just bought a giant room full of gold coins, and I'm gonna dive into it like Scrooge McDuck.
Scrooge McDuck vs Shovel Knight is an episode I've talked about before when I reviewed Steven vs Star, and honestly my opinions are more or less the same as back then. This is a fun episode with a solid enough analysis, a well choreographed, if a bit repetitive fight, and a unique visual style that helps it stand out from the crowd. About the only thing I don't like on the visual front is the sometimes disorienting camera movements. And while I don't mind the bit crush sound effects leading to less impactful strikes, there are points like Shovel Knight using the dust knuckles that felt way weaker than they should, even with the aesthetic in mind. Still, the fight's great. Scrooge's mention is used as an effective set piece to allow him to counter Shovel's weapons, and while there are things for both I'd wish they'd included like the Warhorn, Phase Locket and Burglar Stunner, they use enough for it to still be entertaining. I'm especially impressed with how they worked the fishing rod into the battle in such a creative way. The climax of the fight is also super fun. It does have Shovel.png and Scrooge's guns being spelled out, but it also has the funniest bit of the fight. The money pit feels like the most fitting set piece to have the fight take place in, and the finisher is one of the best of the season. And that's saying a lot because there are some real highlights in here. With how absurdly specific the main connection is for the fight, with them sharing a single move, the fact that they made that one specific move the killing blow is more or less the perfect way to end the fight. Also, Scrooge has to slowly pry Shovel's head off with multiple jumps, and you get to see his head slowly get separated from his neck, all while the super upbeat and happy music plays. That's one of the best uses of tonal whiplash in the show. I am all here for it. This episode has its problems, but I still enjoyed it quite a bit. It's unique in both its visual style and the kind of matchup it is, and those things help out a lot in making episodes memorable for me. It's why Meta vs Carolina and Jack vs Afro are some of my favourites of the show. This isn't anywhere near that level, but it's a fun time nonetheless that I always enjoy revisiting.
And if Goku destroyed the sun, the supernova would blast all the way past Mars and incinerate him.
To be honest, this season was a bit of a slog to get through at points. With all these mediocre episodes this year Death Battle had offered us, it was difficult to stay motivated to watch a lot of these. But I at least knew that they were going to end off with something that was a cut above most of the rest of the season. Sephiroth vs Virgil isn't the masterpiece I remember it being, but I don't care, it was still great. The analysis, while it didn't make me laugh at any point, was still a lot of fun to watch. I was interested to learn about their arsenals and stories, and I liked some smaller details like them going into Sephiroth's hair washing requirements. The supernova explanation as well, while probably not true by their own logic in Link vs. Cloud nowadays, is still interesting to hear them talk about, and the conclusion is solid. Again, not accurate by their current research on Final Fantasy, but I doubt shoddy research will ever have a big impact on how I feel about the rest of the episode, because that requires me to not only give a shit about the research side of things, but also for me to assume that I know better when I most definitely do not. That said, I do take issue with the confusion between tons of Force and tons of TNT in the conclusion. I know it's an easy mistake to make, but also did nobody at any point think, it's a bit weird that cutting a metal door in half is somehow on par with wiping out a city. Anyway, so the animation. It's admittedly the weaker of the two Devil May Cry battles. This is no Dante vs. Bayo. I found that one to have more interesting choreography thanks to the wider arsenals of weapons, and I much preferred the banter and voice acting. But this one's hardly bad in those areas at all, and it actually does match Dante vs. Bayo in the speed of the action and the impact of the sound design. I think this is one of the best conveyances of speed in any death battle. The fast and fluid action, the bit where they both move as a blur, the multiple points where they sword fight while jumping around, there's this constant feeling of movement that lets this feel so much faster than other battles. And this applies especially to Virgil when he starts blitzing around Sephiroth. Though not everything is moving at blinding speeds all the time, because this fight also has some slow motion shots to help stuff sink in, just like what they brought up for the Devil May Cry games in the analysis. And while the sword fighting is great on its own, I especially like the little detail of Virgil hitting Sephiroth with his sword sheath here. Things start to get even more interesting once Seph busts out his magic. When he realizes he's at a disadvantage against Virgil's speed, he uses his quick wit to think of a different strategy and sends his illusions at Virgil to buy himself time to heal himself and to set up the supernova. Virgil fights off the illusions in an exhilarating scene, and once they're all gone we get this amazing reveal that Sephiroth had been playing Virgil the entire time. It would have been easy to have it end here and kill off Virgil to the supernova. That would have been a hardcore way to go out, but he gives it everything he has and manages to barely escape with his life intact. He has a brief moment of relief as he's burned and bleeding all over, only for Sephiroth to take him out immediately. Phenomenal ending to an already pretty great fight. There's more or less no part of the fight where I'm bored or dislike what's going on. My only issues ultimately boil down to some visual shortcomings. The lighting on the models flickers a lot of the time, Virgil's model looks way wider than he's meant to at points, and as minor of a nitpick as this is, Sephiroth goes from wounded to fully healed between shots here, and I don't know why. There's not a whole lot actively wrong with this episode, but it's not hitting peaks as high or frequently as other episodes do for me. I still love it a lot though. It's really, really great. Still don't think it should have been the finale though, like I said before. As good as it is, and as much as I prefer it overall to Naruto vs Ichigo, that one's analysis and matchup made it feel like a much bigger deal. This just feels like another Torian fight, one that isn't even one of his standout best of all time, or even the best of this season. But we'll get there, don't you worry.
That is my last gift to you! A perfect death!
Shredder vs Silver Samurai is an episode that was facing an uphill battle from the start. No voice acting, an animation shorter than 3 minutes, this seemed like it was geared up to be some generic cape shit filler, and instead it ended up being one of my absolute favourite sprite fights the show has ever done. And it is one of very few that I'd give a 10 out of 10 score to. A 10 out of 10 doesn't mean it's perfect, of course, but what this episode does right, it does so right that the flaws may as well not exist. The analysis is pretty fun. I know people take issue with how Shredder's compositing was handled, but for me personally, it was practically tailor-made for me to like it. It focuses on 2012 Shredder primarily, which is the only version I'm super familiar with outside of the cringe-out Michael Bay version, while also throwing in bits and pieces from other Shredders in there, giving me a chance to learn about more versions of the character. It has an exchange that made me laugh, which was so close to including the funny "That's right, boomstick" line, and I love the montage of Shredder's weaknesses. Shredder's analysis as a whole is so fun. Harada's is solid too, not quite as fun as Shredder's, but it was cool to learn about him. I was so excited for this match when it was announced. It was one of those I never knew I wanted this, but I am very excited to learn about these characters kinds of episodes, and it certainly delivered on the analysis front. The fight, on the other hand, delivers even more. Most of my biggest issues come from before the fight even starts. Harada has a crusty render for half a second and these foot soldiers blow up when they get cut apart for some reason, but after Shredder himself appears, there's not much that bothers me. I guess I wish he didn't land this combo string so the fight could better emphasize that one strike was all that either of them needed to take it, though that's in regards to their blades, whereas Shredder lands strikes with his fists that are blocked by Harada's armor. Plus, it's very well animated. I don't know, it's a weird mixed bag for me. So is this shot of Harada looking confused. It makes sense for him to be shocked at Super Shredder, but it looks kinda goofy. You know what isn't a mixed bag though? The entire rest of the animation, because it is banger moment after banger moment from beginning to end. Shredder takes the advantage early on, and then when Harada activates the tachyon field and shows its power by cutting through a tree, Shredder realizes he has to get some distance between them, so he leaps forward across the top of some trees. And it shows the difference in their mindsets as Harada keeps up by running forward while chopping all the trees down. The fight so far have been great, but then after Harada cuts Shredder's cape in half, it picks up so much. The clean as hell rotating shot with Shredder laughing over it after he drops the smoke bomb, both of them dodging and teleporting to avoid every single attack the other throws in a display of immense speed and agility. Harada using Shredder's reflection in his sword to catch him by surprise and land the one hit he needs. This segment is incredible. Then we get Super Shredder and the entire fight dynamic changes. This is no longer a case of both of them only needing one hit with their swords to take the other out like they displayed before. Now Shredder is actively beating the shit out of Harada and has him on the back foot. He goes for a lightning strike and Harada cuts the fucking thing in half, which hits a tree and sets it on fire to give us some pretty lighting that sets the atmosphere flawlessly. Then our last shot before the death is Super Shredder menacingly walking towards Harada with the fire raging in the background, making him appear as just a silhouette, and it looks so good. God, this fight is fucking stellar. It condenses so much cool shit into such a short runtime with barely anything I dislike. Think Leo vs Jason if instead of everything making me think, wow, this is pretty fun, I'm really enjoying this, it instead made me think, holy shit, this is fucking awesome. There are so many standout shots, and with how short this fight is, it just means they happen in such quick succession that it manages to get those kinds of extreme reactions out of me basically the entire time the fight is going. So as long as they could stick the landing well enough, this fight could have easily gotten a 9 out of 10 for me, because it did still have a few minor issues in spite of all the good stuff. And then we get this. I prefer the endings of the top two on the list overall, but in terms of just the kills, this is uncontested my favourite of the season. It is a display of insane gore, the likes of which the show has not seen since. The atmosphere is set perfectly. Shredding Silver's a good track, but there's no way it could have fit this scene without complete whiplash in the last 10 seconds of it. So they made the decision to cut the music completely, and it does wonders. Not every scene needs music, and the silence makes this scene all the more bone-chilling. So does everything on the visual side. I mentioned the forest fire lighting before, but there's also the way Shredder is constantly framed as much taller than Harada to convey his overwhelming power, and then there's everything he does to Harada to finish him off. He chops his arm off with his bare goddamn hands, which causes this massive fountain of blood, embeds his sword through his face, which knocks his helmet off and makes his eye hang out. Then he walks up, karate chops his head off, and crushes it in his hand while a very fitting voice clip plays. There's also an epilogue shot where Harada gets crushed by the soul-destroying Satan sword. Nice. Literally my only nitpick is that Shredder's covered in blood in every shot except the hand-drawn one, but if that's the level I've got to go to in order to find anything to complain about, especially when the lighting makes that not initially obvious, then I have no qualms calling this the best death in any sprite death battle. The conclusion's good too. I like that they directly compare Shredder's attacking speed to Silver Samurai's defending speed to make the difference more clear cut. The fact that I've rambled on for so long about this episode should show how good it is. Sprite fights on the show rarely even get on the same level as this.
I just simultaneously whipped and nay-nayed!
Power Rangers vs Voltron weirdly parallels Hulk vs Doomsday for me. They both got runner-up in my rankings for their season, only held down by a few weak voice lines and some poor visuals. The Megazord and Voltron models themselves look good, but whenever it cuts to the Rangers and the Paladins within them, yeah. Though this was already the most expensive episode for them to make at the time, so I'm hardly going to say they should have diverted more resources into models that are never on screen for more than 10 seconds at a time. Then there's the voice cast, which is mostly solid. Mostly. There is the one performance that I'm not super into, which of course ended up being the character with the most lines. I don't share the internet's burning hatred for Matt Pat, I don't mind him at all as a content creator, but holy shit some of his line deliveries in this are bad. He's fine at the start when he's meant to be talking normally, but when he's meant to be doing those loud actiony shouts, some of them are delivered with about as much energy as a Biffweed video. Some are fine, but others, namely the Ceiling Fan Blades one, are so underwhelming. You know what, I'll get the rest of my issues out of the way right now. Sometimes the lighting on the Power Sword will go haywire, and they have the Megazord roll out of the way of Voltron's forehead laser for some reason, despite the analysis saying how it never dodges. Alright, so with more or less every issue I have in the fight out of the way, God, I fucking love this episode. It's been one of my favourite episodes ever since it came out, and that opinion has never wavered. It's such an exciting battle with stellar choreography. While it doesn't use everything in their arsenals, it still uses enough to where I never thought, oh man, I wish we got to see that as well. And everything they do use feels like it has as much impact as it should. The lasers fittingly feel really powerful, especially when Megazord uses theirs to push Voltron against the wall. I like how the Mastodon shield is used to reflect Voltron's lasers back at them, and I love how they creatively work in the Power Sword summon to use it as a projectile that that hits Voltron on its way down. The first hit of the fight is the Rangers smashing Voltron like a volleyball before grabbing them, lifting them up and throwing them straight down into the ground, and it feels brutally powerful. But not as much as when Voltron later drags the Megazord through all this rock and tosses it into a nearby cliffside. Again, much like Hulk vs. Doomsday, even though the destruction is small scale visually, you feel the weight of it every single time they destroy a giant piece of rock or make a huge explosion. All of this is made even better by the godlike backing track. I love Stronger Together so damn much. It's catchy, high octane, and never fails to make me imagine the ending of the fight every time I listen to it. Oh yeah, the ending, one I would genuinely place alongside Iron Man vs. Lex Luthor as one of the best in the show. Voltron gets pushed back into a corner, then the Megazord goes to swing at its body, but Lance throws his line in front of the sword and gets his segment of the robot destroyed. Side note, they plan to have an epilogue shot where Lance was shown to still be alive, but had to scrap it due to time constraints. I honestly prefer that it wasn't included though, since it means Voltron's victory did come at a cost on their end. Anyway, this causes Pidge to fucking lose it, hit the Megazord back, and use the opening he created to go retrieve the previously lost Blazing Sword. I love that this gets to show off more of his unhinged side that was brought up in the analysis. Of course, Voltron's now left without any reliable way to take the Megazord on in hand-to-hand combat if Pidge doesn't make it back. And the Rangers could easily take Pidge out to secure the win, but good old MatPat knows this and orders the rest of the team to push back on the Rangers with everything they have. I know I ragged on the rest of his performance, but the delivery of this line is no bullshit one of the best in death battle history, and more than makes up for any flaws in the rest of his performance. That line, coupled with the music reaching its peak intensity, going back and forth between the Rangers POV, Pidge getting the sword and Voltron pushing back, this is an adrenaline rush the likes of which death battle has not made sense. It is beyond phenomenal. Not quite as strong as the finale to Tony vs. Lex for me, since that one had a generally more satisfying beatdown at the end, but the gap between them is fairly slim. Even if it's not quite my favourite climax in the show, it's still up there, and it's all capped off with an immensely satisfying swing of the Blazing Sword, as the Rangers explode and the now monoplegic Voltron does a cool pose in front of it. Oh yeah, and I like the analysis. It's funny, goes into the individual Rangers and Paladins, the histories of both sides, the wacky shit they've done, their most impressive looking feats. It gives me similar vibes to Godzilla vs. Gamera, albeit not quite as good. What an episode. It's got its issues for sure, and they do hold it back from the top spot, but as it is, I would not hesitate to give the episode a 10 out of 10. Amazing doesn't even begin to describe it.
And welcome back to Championship Boxing.
You know, I give Sided shit for his favourite episodes, but even if I don't get the appeal behind Danny vs. Jake or Folgo vs. Sector, he at least has one real banger in his top 3. To be blunt, TJ Combo vs. Balrog feels like more of a finale than Virgil vs. Sephiroth did. Hell, it feels more like a finale than most finales do. For a while during this season, Torian had seemingly vanished. At this point, he was putting out a 3D animation once every 3 or so episodes, but here he had vanished for an extra 2, and boy was the wait worth it. If anything, the extended wait time helped it in the long run. Not just because he got to put more time into making a masterpiece, but because it built more anticipation, as did the special trailer they released for it. The analysis isn't exactly one of the most funny ones they've done. It had solid jokes but didn't have me rolling with laughter or anything, but more than most other analysis segments, it captured my interest for characters I don't know much about. I was invested in learning about their stories, and in the end I feel like I had a decent understanding of not just their boxing styles, but who they are as characters. It also managed to make me somewhat interested in boxing. Not to the extent where I'm going to check out any events after the episode's over, but in the moment I was interested to learn about different styles and facts about the history of the sport. Actually, I'll skip ahead to the conclusion real quick. I love how the fight was so close that the triangle theory was what decided the verdict. Matches like that are some of my favourites to discuss. Just saying this was an extremely close match, but character A could hit 5,000 times harder than character B can definitely get a bit stale. Having it come down to how their abilities bounce off each other is much more interesting, but also far rarer, much less their fighting styles. Okay, so now the fight. Where do I even begin? This is one of the most effective uses of the set piece I've ever seen in a death battle. Not because they use the environment for the choreography, but because it helps sell the unique atmosphere the fight has. This feels like an actual boxing match that would be broadcast on TV if not for the whole murder thing. The announcer helped with that as well. It's good to see Chris Guerrero go from one line at the start and end to providing active commentary. It fits so well here. He's not as funny as Nick was in Hercule vs. Dan, but also these two fights are going for such drastically different tones that if anything it would be jarring if Guerrero was the funnier of the two. Next, the choreography and character animation. You can tell how much time and effort Torian put into studying different boxing styles, and it's portrayed well with how TJ tries to stay further back and punish Balrog's missed swings, while Balrog clearly hits harder every time he lands a punch. I know they said TJ was slightly stronger in the analysis, but also it wouldn't feel right if Balrog wasn't the one hitting harder given his fighting style. It's also added to by some great sound design. Every single hit has the impact it needs to. This fight has a good sense of escalation as well. Balrog takes the lead early on, TJ turns it around, Balrog eventually gets so frustrated that he starts fighting dirty, and that gets TJ to start going all out with full-on fighting game combos. They even start getting so into the fight that the arena around them starts to crack in what's essentially a better version of what Ken vs. Terry was going for. Plus we get the best combo breaker in any Killer Instinct episode. I love how they banter with each other as well. Chris J, Alex and Gabe Kunda sell every bit of shit talk towards the other flawlessly, and it sells the impact of a smaller line later on. The one time Balrog says anything that isn't telling TJ to get fucked is his
Wait, what?
at the end. The delivery of this one line further helps to show how taken aback he is, to the point where he's too shocked to even call TJ a weak little bitch. And yeah, I'm in the same boat. This is one of the greatest finales to any death battle. Usually these hero versus villain fights tend to be a little predictable, but with how close this fight is and how it was believable that either could have won, I think that makes TJ's last breath an even more effective comeback. And having him essentially be the protagonist in a fight that has him on his last legs just makes me want to get up and cheer for his victory in a way that pretty much no other episode can claim to accomplish. He gets an amazingly delivered final line, dismantles Balrog in a beatdown almost as satisfying as Tony vs. Lex, breaks his arm, and winds up for one final punch strong enough to knock Balrog's head clean off his shoulders, all set to the fucking incredible back to rise. Does Balrog's broken arm look weird? Yeah. Is it even weirder that it suddenly isn't broken 5 seconds later? Yeah. Do I care? Absolutely not, because the high points here more than outweigh any flaws that the scene, and the rest of the episode for that matter, has. Actually, what can I even bring up as areas this fight falls short in? Balrog's gloat clipping through his body, the ref somehow not going down in one punch and his body occasionally disappearing from the ring, the models clashing. Yeah, if I've got to resort to visual glitches and inconsistencies that minor to find anything to complain about in this episode, then how can I not call this one of my favourites? Rewatching this was such a refreshing experience, not just because of the 4 mediocre to bad episodes in a row right before it, but also because I hadn't seen it in ages all the way through, and I'd forgotten just how good it was. There was never any doubt in my mind that this would be a 10 out of 10, and it still surpassed all of my expectations. Death Battle rarely ever gets better than this. So that was season 4, and I liked it a good amount, I guess. A step up from season 3 in a lot of ways, but not in the ratio of episodes I liked to episodes that I didn't like. That stayed the same with me liking exactly half of the season. Though the difference is that here, unlike with season 3 where I actively disliked a lot of the other half, this one just had a lot of mediocrity. 5 of those episodes land in the 5 out of 10 range, which probably makes up almost half of the 5 out of 10s I've ever given to Death Battle episodes. And one of the 3 below that level I outright dislike is pretty close to the 5 out of 10 threshold anyway. Season 3 at least actively shat the bed enough to where I had stuff to talk about. A lot of this season is just kind of boring. It was worth it in the end, I guess, for the Holy Trinity at the top and a handful of other gems here and there, but the rest of the season's mediocrity means I can't say it was a particularly great season overall. The good stuff here is so good that it outweighs the bad by a good amount, but still. Actually, if there's one thing this season got consistently right, it was the finishers. Even in the bad episodes, they usually at least end the fight scenes on a high note. With the exception of Miguel and Thor, who both had pretty lame deaths, the rest of the season had plenty of amazing kills. They ran the gauntlet from suspenseful to good fake-outs, to horrifying concepts to cool references, to even some genuinely sad ones. And the best ones stand out with some of the best of the show. We got some amazing comebacks and satisfying final beatdowns, on top of some ridiculously painful looking displays of pure unbridled gore. More or less every banger kill of the season excels in a different way, and I would not hesitate to call it the season with the best overall track record in that department. So even if this is far from the best season overall, it's at least still solid. The high points are pretty damn high, and with one exception, the low points honestly aren't that low. In fact, many of my least favourite episodes of the season actually got a bit better revisiting them after so long. Natsu vs. Ace especially is the unsung hero of this collection of episodes. For a season with so many mid episodes, I'm glad the episode I remember being the most mid actually ended up being a pretty fun rewatch. Next season though is season 5. It's been a while since I've gone back to it, so I have no clue what I'm going to think of most of these episodes going in. I'm hoping they live up to how I remember them, but we'll just have to wait and see. Hopefully you guys enjoyed watching this. See you next week when I cover season 5.